Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. Happy Friday, everybody. We've got Nick Viall, former Bachelor star, Bachelor in Paradise, Bachelor Winter Games, Bachelorette twice, Special Force. You get the point. Nick actually commented to fellow reality stars about, I guess, the Bachelor podcaster ecosystem and how maybe he thinks people need to get his name out of their mouths. I don't mean to put words in his, but we're going to share actually what he said. Follow me on Instagram right there at DNeals for stand-up show updates. If you enjoy my content and live in the Phoenix area, March 28th will be one of my last shows for a little bit. Be having the baby after that, so going to be doing a headliner set there with special guest, former Bachelor Clayton Eckert. He'll be there for a Q&A if you want to come hang with us. It'll be worth it just to go to the after party. It'll be a ton of fun. Tickets are on sale like $20, whatever. So come to that March 28th if you're in the Phoenix area. And also the morning and afternoon Bachelor Rush Hour podcast. Now, I did discuss this on the morning podcast, but not everybody who listens to the podcast also catches my YouTube. So with the powers vested in me due to this venti cold brew iced coffee, let's get started. So what I'm going to share with you is Nick's comments. I'll pause them to properly attribute who I believe he's speaking to. Then I'll share some of your comments and other podcasters' comments regarding this very weird caste system we've got going on here in Bachelor Nation. There's like 6 levels of who you are. There's like Jesse Palmer, then the Nicks of the crowd, that's the Caitlin Bristows, the Nick Vialls, and there's really only a couple on that level, Rachel Lindsay, like that. And then below that you have the Blake Horstmans and other fellow influencers that have made a living in Bachelor adjacent world. And then far down the level are the pond scum, known as people who actually enjoy the Bachelor franchise, so talk about it. That being me, She's All Batch, Reality Steve. Those are real muck that you get stuck into at the bottom of the lake. We're going to get into it in a second. Let's play what Nick had to say here on his podcast. I believe it's called Vialls. Always give credit to podcasts you're speaking about.
Page, yeah, and then they show their comment on your page. Yeah, so it's like they actually really get to exist in your world instead of zapping them out of your world.
Not to mention, like, Daily Mail now will do a whole post of like 5 trolls in your comment section, be like, "Oh, look what they're saying about Nick." And
that
it's
is
like,
true. It is.
And that is annoying, right? That they'll take what a troll will say and make a whole article about that. I try, and I'm not saying I'm better than them. I try to stick to the source material. I think that's one of the biggest issues we have with media in general, whether it be podcasting. It's like on Nick's show, I don't know, he's got a little bit of a cowboy fetish going on here. Hey, not too bad though. On Nick's show, they'll talk a lot about what somebody said, but not share the source material. They for sure have the bandwidth to do that. They got the TV there, the 17 producers. So for me, whenever someone conflates someone else's thing, like so-and-so did this or said that, I get kind of annoyed. I like to share exactly what came out of the horse's mouth. That way we can talk about it in what I hope to be less of a biased way.
It's tough because I always try to, I always try to find a positive and a negative. And it's just like, there are a lot of, we're proud of the work we've done here at the Vialls and the size of the show has gotten. And there's a lot of podcasts out there, as you guys know, and there's a lot of Bachelor fan podcast. There's just a lot of Bachelor podcasts, and they all have one thing in common: is like they fucking hate me.
Really?
So that's obviously a generalization. I don't think they all hate him. I think there's plenty of alumni that have burnt bridges with him. And I think there's plenty of podcasters that feel as if he has an elitist mentality. I will cite my sources in a minute.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Well, most of them have all tried to come on the show. And you can always, the tide always turns when you don't have them on.
I totally know that feeling of when someone says no to you, you don't like them anymore, and blah, blah, blah. We've never asked to be on Nick's show. Silence was deafening. We understood that Nick didn't want us on his show. And I think the podcaster he's referencing in this moment is very funny, very successful comedian Jared Freid. Now, if I was to just jump to Jared Freid's Instagram, it'll explain for you why I could understand Jared being upset. Jared Freid is, like I said, very successful. 332,000 followers. And those followers didn't come on accident. They are from years. 10 to 15 years of hard work, writing blogs for different organizations, hammering out his stand-up comedy. I'm not kidding. He's super funny. He got a Netflix special, which is kind of like the biggest thing you can get in the stand-up world. Now, why would Jared just be salty that Nick wouldn't have him on? Because Jared understands what the game is. There's an almost sort of union vibe that happens with content creators. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So Jared opened up his podcast to Nick, saying, hey, come on, they could do the podcast. And then when the roles were reversed, Nick was all crickets when it came time to having Jared on Nick's. Jared would be a fantastic guest to have on Nick's. It would introduce Nick to some new audience, but it would also take audience away from Nick because Jared's really funny. He's really good at what he does. No offense to Nick. Nick has used the tools presented to him for success, one of which being getting on reality TV, which puts gasoline on the fire, gets you a ton of audience and new Instagrammers, and helps you rise the ranks. So Nick's no blue-collar guy like a She's All Batch podcast that kind of created something out of nowhere. He took what was given to him, and the only issue with that, sometimes, like I've said before, is people who start on third base who think they hit a triple. I hope Nick is aware of the sort of privilege and place he kind of came from by getting in on the show and all of that. Courtney Robertson, another fantastic alumni from Bachelor Nation, not part of the cool kid club. Maybe her Instagram didn't take off because when she was on the show, it was before the Instagram success. And Courtney also has heard crickets from Nick when it came time to returning the favor, having her on his podcast. So I think people just all see how sociopathic it can be, and even psychopathic. And that's how a corporation is run. Very psychopathically. We talk about this all the time. It's run psychopathically in the sense that it doesn't worry about other people's feelings. And that's kind of how Nick runs his business, which you might say is perfectly fine and fair, but when you have a business that's so ingrained with other people's emotions, the playing in the sandbox, as you will, it's very easy to see someone who's taking all the toys and not sharing. And I think that's how a lot of podcasters feel about the scenario. So just to say we wouldn't have them on so they hate us, he's not paying attention to the unwritten, and maybe Jared and I understand this as stand-up comedians, the unwritten sort of like, I help you out, you help me. And he's saying, now, my audience is bigger and better than all of you. You cannot afford to be on my channel. And Jared just proves the point, and he's roasted Nick before. He proves the point that Jared's super successful. You know, my channel, I don't have the most Instagram followers, whatever, but when I am invited onto podcasts, those podcasts outperform their numbers. Caitlin Bristow, you look at my episodes, there are big Instagrammers, big influencers that go on Caitlin Bristow's show and don't get nearly the amount of YouTube views we get because we have a loyal audience. Nick knew that. I mean, he knew that to the extent where he called me and wanted to talk about my business plans and my ambitions and even possibly hire me in the future. Now, I would have politely declined because we do well on our own and we don't need a boss. But I understand his business side of things. And at the same time, like I said, that psychopathic nature of, oh, I'm not going to respond when it doesn't benefit me, that doesn't always play well. If I was of higher stature and standing that could pull Nick up, of course he would reach out to me. We're just not there. And I think actually that helps you feel less offense because it's like not really that personal. It just doesn't help him out. And some people just think in what works for me. That's a very Hollywood way of thinking.
They go from fans to haters. All of these shows have one thing in common. They all talk about this show. Every week, you know, it's like
your show.
Oh my God, they're
and some people are saying he's talking about Game of Roses. Oh, I'm wearing their shirt today. I'm not really sure if he's talking about Game of Roses. Probably me. We will make content, which I will share with you. It's not just let's talk about Nick. I try to look at it this way. I try to break down I try to separate the argument from the person, right? Attack the point, not the person. So I have nothing against Nick. If I ran into him at a store, I'd be like, hey man, how are you? Good to see you, whatever. I personally don't have anything personal. The only personal thing I have with Nick, personal, is that he deleted me from his episode. To me, that's a fuck you, and it takes food off my family's table because I mention him. I think it's a fair thing to do when talking about someone. He has removed me from conversation. I mean, blatantly edited me out of conversation. What's he afraid of? people finding my channel and going, oh, we kind of like what Dave's doing over here. Nick, you're so big and mighty. There's enough room at the Thanksgiving table. There's enough turkey to go around here. We have boatloads of cranberry sauce, Nick. And someone actually commented, and I don't even know the family dynamic here, but someone said maybe Nick comes from a large family where he, had to fight for food and fight for resources growing up. That could be possibly true.
Shows
they're tuning in
are based off of what we talk about,
like recap.
The trickle down theory.
They're like your
You know what I actually love about Heidi and Spencer here? They're actually likable. Like they don't respond to his negative attribute. They're kind of just laughing about it. They're almost like they've been celebrities longer in the reality world. And by the way, they have had to deal with way more hate than Nick has without really knowing Heidi or Spencer, except from, their shows back in the day where he was kind of like a villain status. You look at them now and you go, just from what I'm seeing now, they seem relatively well adjusted.
Vialls podcast.
Not entirely,
God.
but I would say,
Segments.
anywhere from 10 to 50% of their content is, Viall Files adjacent. So it's
and you might find weeks where we are 10% Nick. But I want to explain some of that. So let's just jump into some of the reasons why. I mean, because he'll use, we know what his business model is, and I just think it's kind of reckless, right? He knows when he can get clickbait printed. So like when he was promoting his like nasal fuel thing, whatever, he literally, he sort of bullies Gary because he knows he's going to get things printed out of there. So, I mean, he called Golden Bachelor's late wife, he said her body was barely cold yet. I mean, honestly, he's lucky Gary didn't try to kick his fucking ass. Do you know what I mean? I mean, imagine in real time if someone said that about your late wife. Could you imagine anything but being confronted in person when someone would talk that way and be like, correct the fucking way you say that? And then what happens the next time they talk is he goes, oh, remember we made a lot of news about that. It's all about news. And again, that just kind of gets to the psychopathic nature of corporate world. And this isn't really corporate world, but it's the idea of there's no such thing as a bad story there. He threw away took a dig at Caitlyn's fertility and sexual health, or I shouldn't say fertility, sexual health, by saying nothing asexual here. He just like, it's just like that thing. And I guess people find it funny, but like he's saying this to and about his coworkers, victim shaming Clayton, then has Clayton on, then makes fun of him again. Foundation disputes Nick's claims. He conflated what the UCAN Foundation is doing and completely changed it around. Nick Thompson says it's frustrating when someone wants to talk about you without talking to you. Nick Thompson, also a former reality star that you would think would have some sort of tie to Nick, both having been villainized in different ways. But Nick, he takes it as like sort of a weird competition, like Nick Thompson's coming for Nick Viall's spot here, when in fact Nick Thompson's trying to make the reality TV landscape a better place. Nick Viall doesn't see the altruistic nature in that. He only sees the negative side of that. Oh, he's only doing this because he wants more Instagram followers, because that, I guess, is the way Nick thinks on a zero-sum game. Nick and girlfriend exposed Katie Thurston's DMs. Remember when Nick said that Blake Horseman was in the wrong for exposing DMs to vindicate himself? Then Nick and girlfriend exposed Katie's DMs. It completely backfires when Katie says, I blocked Nick because of things that he said to me, and then she sees him at a festival and he's like, you should come on the podcast. And when she gets hate, he says, isn't it good to get hate? It means people love you. He said the same thing about Reality Steve. Oh, your audiences are really passionate. It's like he's almost like immune from criticism, which is fine. Blake Horseman slamming Nick for the hypocrisy. So it goes on and on and on. He shared wildly damaging unverified tea about the Golden Bachelor. I mean, where does it end, right? So for us to call this out, we got deleted and things like that. Sharing here the moment where I was deleted, I don't think that's salty so much as saying, if I were a teacher and you were a student, I'm going to dot your I and cross your T. I'm going to say, this is where I disagree. If we're not covering Nick because there isn't something I disagree about, and I know he respects the fact that he's a large platform, I'm not even saying he shouldn't be talking about this. I'm just saying I'm going to provide the dissenting opinion. It's almost like if you watch the State of the Union address with President Joe Biden, the Republican Party provides a dissenting thought. The same thing happens in the Supreme Court. I'm not relating what we do to that level. I'm just saying for every opinion out there, there's a group of people who feel a different way. Most in my audience kind of think and feel the way I do because they enjoy my content. Most of my audience saw what I'm about to share with you, and they got really bummed out because they saw firsthand how minimizing others can be.
I get out of my case and I get a text from a podcaster, and he said, "Hey, I get out of my case and I get a text from a podcaster
named Dave Neal, featured in Time magazine." Okay, so I edited it, and then people, that like me thought, "Oh, this is amazing," and then people that don't like me were like, "Oh, he's so petty," and it kind of goes back and forth. But to say, "Oh, so and so salty about so and so," I would just say, well, these are just things I disagree on. I disagree on some of the ways in which he's handled some of these controversies.
Kind of like,
Did you send them merch?
They're about to be so mad that he just
They're
said
so
that.
mad.
This is a post right now.
They're going to talk.
And it is. And by the way, I am immune to the criticism here because I really like Natalie Joy. I think she does a good job. I think she's good, like color commentary sidekick for Nick here. I think if you can find someone like they're married or they're getting married, right? So he can put her on payroll, get tax write-offs, and she provides value and the money kind of stays within the family. I think that's good. I think I like it. I'm not upset. I'm truthfully not upset. Sometimes things make me upset, sure. And then sometimes there's the theater arts of performing, which is what we do here. I spoke to DePaul University yesterday. Oh, hey, shout out to DePaul. How are you guys? Good to see everybody out there. There is a class on the Bachelor Nation, and I talk very specifically about my gripes and who, all of the ins and outs of it. But what it comes down to with content creation is information and entertainment. And with me, I try to provide entertainment through standing up and shaking the things. I mean, I don't need to explain to you guys the performance element here, but you do got to get yourself riled up because you are trying to sort of like put on a show to an extent. I'm not mad at all. Again, I think I've even texted her or DM'd her or whatever and said, I think you're doing great. I told Nick, not that you need my sort of opinion, but she's doing great. Keep it going. It's just when it gets onto the sort of like bonding over the low energy or the negativity of like these other podcasters. I mean, look, no offense to Natalie. Beautiful baby, beautiful family, like what they're doing. There's plenty of people that don't have the attachment to the following that have worked really hard to build their audiences. And I just wouldn't negate the effort that they've put in. People like She's All Batch. They commented on this. I asked them for a comment. I said, can I share a comment? Stephanie from She's All Batch, which we love them, said, it's funny that while explaining why Bachelor podcasters hate Nick, he proves why he's so unlikable. It's how he speaks like he's above other people, especially people who aren't considered famous. At the end of the day, we're doing the same thing he's doing. We just didn't go on reality TV prior to doing it. Also, he speaks very knowledgeably about what these other podcasters cover. Maybe you're a fan as well, Nick. It really is funny. Like Nick recaps Love is Blind, totally fine. And other podcasts recap Love is Blind, fan podcast. Nick interviews a reality TV star, totally fine. Another podcast interviews a reality TV star, fan podcast interviewing washed up reality TV star. Yes, I understand the way of thinking, but by all means, not everyone in my community agrees with my thoughts. I posted this last night after having recorded my podcast earlier. We got roasted to hell by Nick Viall. I'm offering my reaction on the Morning Bachelor Rush Hour podcast. I think my response makes sense. Let me know what you think. Weird week, but more love is out there, so not going to dwell on the negative. So I posted that, and I got mainly good comments, but again, the good comments don't always print the story here. And then we have this one comment from, I guess, a fan of ours who said, but you always dwell on what Nick says or does. And my best response before you're about to take things personally is to ask people to elaborate. I love this because I'd like to know how I'm always dwelling on what Nick says. And this person said, seems you are obsessed with Nick. Is there a day his name is not on your lips? You seem to want your followers to go to his pod and make negative comments. You seem to encourage them in bad behavior. Not a good look. And then my response was, you seem is a dangerous assumption. I don't ask for that. I'd say my Nick-related content is about 10% of the Bachelor discussion, which generally lines up with his percentage of equity within the franchise. So if Nick's on the Mount Rushmore of Bachelor commentators and things that we talk about, he's going to get spoken about in the same amount of time as a Rachel Lindsay, although Rachel Lindsay doesn't really say much controversial stuff within our niche. Do you understand? So he knows what he's doing, and I think it's very fair to continue a discussion about Bachelor while also... It'd be like if I had a discussion about politics without covering President Biden. Am I relating Nick to President Biden? Yes, they're both old. No, I'm kidding. He's not much older than me. But my point being is that when you're a seat at the table of the niche that is discussed, of course you're going to be talked about. But either way, I said you seem as a dangerous assumption, and they said you always say don't post negative comments. Oh, someone else said Dave always said he don't post negative comments, so you're very wrong there. Oh yeah, I always say the lowest form of intelligence is when you post negative comments on someone else's page. That is literally the lowest form of intelligence. So this response was, read comments. The minions always say, let's go say this or comment negative on that. Open your eyes. You never get to the top by putting others down. I agree with that. You don't get to the top by putting others down. I just disagree with that being necessarily the merit of our content. Nick doesn't have to ask his followers to like or listen to something he posts. They just do. Well, I mean, I have a Facebook fan page. So every once in a while, I try to drive traffic to my channel. That wasn't even part of the argument. Odd. I said, before I go further, and this is where it gets important, before you go deep into the wormhole, I said, before I go further, did you listen to my morning episode or did you listen to what Nick said? Be honest. And the person said, neither. I don't feed into that garbage. And by the way, this person's sort of just putting out their own garbage. And I said, so what the heck are we doing here? Got to go back to work. And it's a good reminder that, oh my gosh, if we're not even listening to the things we're talking about, why are we fucking commenting on here? And this isn't any dig at this specific person. No offense to Kathy or whoever the hell this is. I don't know them personally. My guess is they're going to say, I was in your Patreon, I liked you, but now you've changed or this and that. No, it is not a personal dig at you. I don't know who you are. You're probably a great mom, grandmother, whatever. You know what I mean? You probably make a great macaroni salad. I don't fucking know. But my point is this... we can have discussions and not be like, we've got all these haters. I think that takes away from the actual discussion.
Talk about this on their next episode.
Oh my gosh. Well, good. Give them the content.
Yeah.
Keep pumping it.
Yeah.
Everyone
Talk about us too.
Hey, aren't they sweet? I like Heidi and Spencer. I just don't take them reacting negatively to this as the others have. But either way, so when we were deleted, as we were from this conversation, people said, why do you care, whatever? Well, because it's just it wasn't going to give us more views. We're already crushing it, guys. I'm a one-man shop. This is no knock on Nick. He employs different people and they do a good job. We're a one-man shop. We're absolutely crushing it. I don't need a pat on the back from anybody, although we do get plenty of love out there from the people that understand independent content creating. But because of that, we had audience members that created merchandise. I mean, literal hundreds of you bought this merchandise and wore it to court. It's humbling, So every once in a while, you got to make a video like this to almost cement your audience into being on your team. That doesn't mean you have to knock somebody else's team. That just means, of course I'm gonna recap when I think someone else kind of spends 1 minute discussing what it just took us 23 minutes to get through, which is that now you just have some shit takes, and your shit takes are shit, and you get Us Weekly articles printed about them and stories. And what happens, and this is where I'm sure if he has any business advisor, someone should be careful to just be like, okay, keep giving your shit takes, but don't fly too close to the sun, because you might give a take that really crosses the line. But again, I'm all about First Amendment. I truly am. If people like your take, they'll stick with you. And if they don't, they won't. There is an ecosystem for both. We'll be back with more content right after this. I'll be live on Patreon if you want to join us at 12 Central Standard Time. I've been Some Podcaster. We'll see you next time.